few days ago I had ordered a product, an item on eBay, and it was a log album, which I have one for my father from the USS Detroit. But this one, it had no photos in it, but it had with it a blue star banner that said, "Our son is in the Navy." And this was from World War II. And of course, it got sent to me very promptly. I have no qualms or issues with the seller. Unfortunately, the item got sent to my home address and was apparently promptly stolen from my porch. And that bothered me for a lot of reasons. The actual theft bothered me the least. What bothered me was this was a piece of history and a piece of a family. And it's always been one of those things in going to flea markets or to thrift stores when I would see portraits, military portraits from World War II, World War I, but usually World War II. Just up for sale, and obviously some family had forgotten who this person was. It was probably passed down either to a relative that had no clue who the person was, didn't care who the person was. So I've seen that happen a lot, and it kind of bothers me because these are people, and to be so quickly just tossed aside and forgotten by a family, that bothers me. That's just me. That's why I have all of, well, not all, but a good deal of my father's photos and memorabilia still here, hanging on my wall or tucked away in places I know, because it's family. It's part of the family history. And both sides of my family, I know our history going back on my dad's side to the 1780s and a little bit earlier, and actually a little earlier in France and a lot earlier in England, because apparently we had a family member who was a lieutenant for Cromwell in the English Civil War. And my mom's side of the family, I know our history back to the 1600s when they first came over to New England. But anyway, I got to thinking about it, and I looked at the listing again, and one of the things that I had enjoyed about the listing or the item was, even though there weren't any photos, it had a signed certificate of Neptune for crossing the line ceremony, crossing the equator. And the name on the certificate, and I apologize to anyone who may stumble across this and actually be a family member and know the family name pronunciation, but the name was written Eddie Kycia. Maybe it's Kycia, but it's Eddie Kycia, and he was aboard, and I didn't pay attention to it initially. He crossed the line in September of 1944 on the USS Laffey. Now, there are people who immediately will know the history of the USS Laffey, and I'm going to go into that a little bit, or at least they'll know the event that she is famous for. She was an Allen M. Sumner class destroyer. She displaced 3,200 tons, was 376 feet and 6 inches long, had 3 twin mount, 2 in the fore, 1 in the aft, 5-inch turrets, along with, I believe, 2 quintuple torpedo launchers amidships, which, if I am, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. She served in World War II, went into the reserve for a little bit, and then was upgraded as a guided missile destroyer, I believe, and served in the United States Navy until she was stricken and decommissioned in March 1970, which is not a bad run for a World War II destroyer. She is currently a museum ship at Patriots Point in Charleston, South Carolina, which is another crossed paths thing because my dad was, well, he was from Greenville, but he grew up in Charleston. She was named after Bartlett Laffey, who was born in Ireland in 1841 and enlisted in the Navy on the March 17th in 1862. He was assigned to stern-wheel gunboat Marmara, and on the 5th of March 1864, Confederate forces launched an attack on Union positions in Yazoo City, Missouri, and in the midst of the battle, Laffey landed a 12-pounder howitzer and her crew. Despite enemy rifle fire, which cut up his gun carriage and severed the rammer for the gun, Laffey stood by his gun and contributed to the turning of the battle, or turning back the Confederate assault. For this, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, and he died in Chelsea, Massachusetts in March of 1901. It's interesting to note at the time that was the Congressional Medal of Honor was, as I recall, you can call me on it if I'm wrong, was the only medal that Congress actually handed out, and they had to come up with a whole series of things, or maybe it was even just the only medal handed out. But on November 21st, we're going to fast forward to 1943, Beatrice F. Laffey, who was the daughter of Seaman Laffey, helped the christening. She was one of the sponsored family members, and she christened the Laffey at the launching of the ship. She was launched in November 21st, 1943 at Bath, Maine. So, that's the history of the ship. Now, I don't know much about Eddie Kycia. I went on the website Fold3, which I've been using as a research implement into my father's records, which I've found some stuff, and I'm actually currently waiting for records and replacement awards, citations, certificates, ribbons, etc. from the National Archives, which you can do, and I will go into that in a separate video on how to do that if you have a family member that you're curious about their military history and service. So, what the Laffey is famous for, or is known for, is the fact that on April 13th, 1945, and I've looked up Eddie Kycia's records, and I'll post them here. He, I believe, transferred on to the Laffey a month or two after her christening, and I have the Decalogue albums that show that he transferred on and was on the ship for the entirety of her World War II service, and actually got promoted to Seaman First Class, and if I'm reading the abbreviations correctly, he was a torpedoes mate. So he served on one of the two, if I'm reading it correctly again, one of the two quintuple torpedo tube mounts. So he was out in the open, pretty much, sitting on 5 very high explosive weapons. Not really a place that I think you would really want to be. So on the evening of April 13th, 1945, the Laffey received its orders, and it was assigned to Radar Picket Station number 1. And these were set up for protection of the Okinawa landing sites and invasion, and many ships, including my dad's, the J. William Ditter, at, I can't recall if it was an earlier or later date, I believe it may have been a later date by just a few days, his ship was hit by 2 kamikazes as well. So, the Laffey got established at radar picket station number 1 with, I can't remember the name of the other destroyer. She was attacked. She was 50 miles off of Okinawa with LCS 56 and LCS 151, which were landing craft support ships that once they had dropped off troops would come back out off of the landing zone and actually assist the picket ships with anti-aircraft duty. They had a 3-inch gun forward, two 40mm bow guns, plus two 40mm deck guns, one forward and aft, and four 20mm cannons, two port, two starboard, and additionally had four 50 caliber heavy machine guns. So on screening duty, they were the closest to the Japanese mainland. The last four destroyers that were assigned to this station were attacked by kamikaze aircraft. At 7:45 a.m., the Laffey's radar picked up a single aircraft out from the port quarter. The Laffey's 5-inch directed guns opened fire. At about 3 miles out, it was determined it was a Japanese Val, a dive bomber, and it dropped its single bomb and turned back to Japan. At 8:39 a.m., 50 Japanese planes appeared on the radar. This included Val, Judy, and dive bombers, and Kate torpedo planes. Now, by this point of the war, these were older planes and were being sent out expressly for the fact that they were sacrificable. Is that a word? Anyway, the attack began with 4 Vals. 2 came in bow on, so the captain, Beckman, ordered evasive maneuvers to allow the Laffey to fire a broadside at the incoming aircraft. 5 inchers opened up, the long range, and then the close-in 40mm, etc. started to open up. And one of the 50 calibers actually got involved in this. Both planes coming in off the bow were splashed, and the ship was fine. A Judy attacked from one side of the ship and was shot down as well. All enemy aircraft downed at this point was 5 in the action. From port, another Judy attacked and strafed the ship but was eventually shot down as well. At 8:43, a Val attacked the stern and the Laffey's anti-aircraft array ruptured one of the gas tanks on the plane, and as it flew over the stern, the gas that was on fire spilt out onto the Laffey's rear decks. The 9th kamikaze attacked from port, and the airplane utilized a low attack but did not climb as expected. They would come in low and then at the last second would pop up and then to about 1,500 feet and then dive straight down on the ship. This was one of the tactics that the kamikazes used. He kept so low he was underneath the ability of the 5-inch guns to bring fire to bear. And he came in and crashed amidships into a 20mm Oerlikon anti-aircraft mount and killed the 3-man crew. The smoke from that attack swept over the rear of the stern of the Laffey and basically provided a smoke screen for incoming attackers. So a Val, using that smoke screen, crashed into the ship and sent fuel and bomb fragments below deck. Support ship LCS 51 was close by, firing on the aircraft. Said that members of that crew witnessed members of the Laffey crew on fire jumping overboard. At 8:56, the aft double 5-inch gun mount on the Laffey took a direct hit, and that killed 6 of the 14 men who were in that mount. After this, a Val flew over the Laffey and took an aim at LCS-51, steaming off of Laffey's port quarter. In response, LCS-51 took aim and shot the plane down. However, the engine in the debris of this anti-aircraft kill actually came down and hit LCS-51, injuring several of the crew. The Laffey, meanwhile, is on fire. Her rear quarterdeck is on fire. The captain had to reduce speed in an effort to try and quell the flames a little bit, not pour oxygen onto it. At this moment, a Val saw this and came in on a bombing run and dropped a 500-pound high explosive bomb that hit the aft section and jammed the rudders at 27 degrees to port. At this point, some help arrived in the form of 4 Grumman FM-2 Wildcats from VC-94 Squadron, and they were assigned to the U.S. carrier USS Shamrock Bay. There were 40 Japanese aircraft remaining in the wave that was working over Laffey's group. 2 aircraft got by the Wildcats and both hit the Laffey. Wildcats shot down 6 kamikazes and eventually, low on fuel, had to break off their attack and return back to their base. So at this point, the Laffey took 5 kamikazes along with 3 bomb hits. At a short time after this, 12 F-4U Corsair fighters formed a combat air patrol and attacked the remaining 30 Japanese planes. One of the F-4Us followed in an Oscar on its kamikaze attack. That plane hit the yardarm, disintegrated, and carried on, but the Corsair was so close behind him that he actually hit the ship's radar antenna, damaging his plane to the point that he had to ditch and be rescued out of the water. The final part of the action, which had lasted, I recall it was at least an hour and a half, I may be wrong on that, 80 minutes, hour and a half. The 22nd Japanese plane was shot down by an F-4U, and the Laffey had been struck by no fewer than 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs, and lost 32 of her crew with another 71 wounded. Now, I've seen a couple different things whether it's apocryphal or not, but apparently the captain stated that instead of abandoning ship, his quote is, "I'll never abandon a ship so long as a gun can fire." The Laffey put out their fires, buried their dead, and then took under tow for temporary repairs to Okinawa, then sailed through via Saipan, Eniwetok, and finally Hawaii, eventually arrived at Tacoma, Washington on May 24th, 1945. She entered dry dock there for repairs, and then I believe she was decommissioned on the 30th of June 1947 and put into reserves. Now, she was recommissioned and reactivated, but that's not the part of the story I'm gonna tell. I'll include links, etc. for that. But I'm making this video, and hopefully I can pull it off with a modicum of polish, because I ordered an item on eBay and I hadn't paid attention to the history of it, and due to my not paying attention to the address that I was having it sent to, because I usually have stuff sent to my work, a small piece of history about a very proud ship and about a man that I'm not sure if there are family members out there who knew him. I believe he was from New England, either Massachusetts or Connecticut, from what I can tell. And I don't have a picture of him, and maybe somebody will stumble across this and actually have a picture of him. But it's sort of an apology to history and, unwittingly to Eddie and his family and his service and his ship, because his ship is a very storied ship, and to have gone through all of that, survived it, and I'll have to look at the records. I believe he died sometime in the 90s, but I'll check that out as well. But that's why I made this video, and hopefully it's a little piece of history you didn't know, and perhaps you enjoy it or get something out of it. And if anyone knows the family or anyone in the USS Laffey Association knows of Eddie and can provide me with any information about him, I will endeavor to do a follow-up video if I find enough information. So be careful when you order stuff, I guess, is one of the things to take away from this. And hopefully this will assuage the loss of 2 items, and by preserving the memory of one man among many on a ship that did a lot. Alright, I'm going to go try and edit this now.